The huge meeting hall of the Galactic Council was quiet for the first time in hundreds of years. The silence felt heavy and strange. Where the human delegates used to sit, there were only empty chairs. 3 months had passed since those chairs were last filled. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin had been the last human to speak in the council chambers. His words were simple and calm. "We understand your position. Thank you for your time." Then he had picked up his papers, nodded politely to the other delegates, and walked out. The other humans followed him without saying anything. They moved quietly and quickly, like they always did when they had made up their minds about something. Nobody in the council thought much about it at first. Humans were still new to space travel compared to other species. They had only learned to travel faster than light 200 years ago. That was nothing compared to the Zephyrians, who had been flying between stars for over 10,000 years. The Keth had been trading across the galaxy for even longer than that. The humans had come to ask for help. Pirates from the void sectors were attacking their frontier colonies. They said the attacks were getting worse and more organized. They needed ships and weapons to protect their people. The human ambassador had spoken clearly and honestly about the problem. He showed pictures of destroyed settlements and lists of missing people. But the council members had not been impressed. Counselor Vex-High of the Zephyrians had spoken for most of them when she said, "These are minor raids on a few small colonies. Surely the humans can handle such a simple problem themselves. Why should we waste our great fleets on something so small?" The Keth representative had agreed. "Our ships are meant for real wars, not chasing a few pirates around empty space. The humans chose to build colonies in dangerous areas. They should have thought about protection before they went there." Other council members had nodded and made similar comments. The humans were being dramatic about nothing. Pirates were a normal part of life on the frontier. Every species had dealt with them when they were young and expanding. It was how they learned to be strong. But Ambassador Chen had not argued with them. He had not raised his voice or made threats like other species did when the council said no. He had just listened carefully to every word. When the voting was finished and the council had officially refused to help, he had simply said those final words and left. Now, 3 months later, the council was starting to worry. Not because the humans were angry or making trouble. The worry came from something much stranger. The humans had simply vanished. At first, it seemed normal. Many species took time to cool down after a disappointing council meeting. But when traders tried to visit human space, they found something impossible. Every hyperspace lane that led to human territory was blocked. Not by weapons or force fields, but by something else. Ships that tried to enter human space found themselves, turned around and heading back the way they came. The pilots could not explain how it happened. The few messages that came from human space were polite but firm. "Thank you for your interest in visiting. Humanity is currently not accepting visitors. We apologize for any inconvenience." That was all. No anger, no threats, no demands. Just a closed door. Counselor Vex-High stood at the great window of her office, looking out at the busy space traffic around the council station. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went every day, bringing trade and news and visitors. But none of them were human ships. The humans had been regular visitors before. Their traders had been reliable and fair. Their diplomats had been helpful in solving problems between other species. Their explorers had shared interesting discoveries about new worlds and strange phenomena. Now there was just nothing. It was like the humans had erased themselves from the galaxy. The first real sign of trouble came from the trade reports. The Galactic Trade Commission noticed that several important shipping routes were having problems. Cargo was being delayed or lost. Prices for certain goods were going up quickly. When they looked into the causes, they found something disturbing. Humans had been handling many of the most difficult and dangerous trade routes. They took jobs that other species found too risky or too boring. They carried supplies to new colonies on the edge of known space. They transported medical supplies through areas where pirates might attack. They delivered food to worlds hit by disasters or crop failures. Other species could do these jobs, but they charged much higher prices. They also required heavy protection and insurance. The humans had done the work for fair prices and had rarely lost a cargo shipment. They had been so reliable that other species had stopped thinking about backup plans. How many trade routes were dependent on human ships? Counselor HFY asked her assistant. The young Zephyrian checked his data pad, and his light patterns flickered with worry. Approximately 37% of frontier trade, Counselor, and 62% of emergency supply runs. HFY felt her own patterns dim with concern. Can other species take over those routes? Some of them, Counselor. But the costs will be much higher, and several routes may have to be abandoned completely. Other species consider them too dangerous. But the trade problems were not the worst news. Reports were coming in from the frontier about the void sector raids that the humans had asked for help with. The attacks were getting bigger and more frequent. What had started as small pirate raids on a few human colonies had grown into something much more serious. The raiders were hitting non-human settlements now. 3 Keth mining stations had been destroyed in the past month. A Zephyrian research outpost had simply vanished, leaving no trace except empty space where it used to be. The attackers used strange tactics that made no sense to military experts. They seemed to appear from nowhere, hit their targets with overwhelming force, and disappear before help could arrive. Counselor Thekmore of the Keth hegemony called an emergency meeting to discuss the raids. Military leaders from several species gathered to share information and plan a response. The mood in the meeting was tense and confused. These raiders fight like no civilized enemy, General Korthes reported. They do not follow standard battle formations. They do not try to capture territory or demand tribute. They simply attack and destroy, then vanish. What do they want? Asked Admiral Yendal of the Zephyrian fleet. We do not know, Korthes admitted. They take some supplies and equipment, but they destroy more than they steal. It is almost like they are testing our defenses rather than trying to profit from raids. The military leaders agreed to send patrol ships to the affected areas. They would coordinate their efforts and share intelligence about the mysterious raiders. It seemed like a good plan, the kind of organized response that had always worked for the Council in the past. But as the meeting ended, Counselor Thekmore found himself thinking about the humans. They had warned about these raids months ago. They had asked for help to stop the problem before it got worse. The Council had said no because the raids seemed small and unimportant. Now the raids were spreading to other species, and the Council was scrambling to respond to a threat they could have helped stop when it was still manageable. The humans had been trying to protect not just themselves, but the whole frontier region. The Council had been too proud to listen. Thekmore stared at the empty chairs where the human delegation used to sit. He wondered what Ambassador Chen was doing now. Was he protecting his people from the raids? Was he angry at the Council for refusing to help? Or was he simply focused on solving the problem himself, the way humans always seem to do when others let them down? The Council chambers felt smaller somehow without the humans there. Less complete. Thekmore had not realized how much he had gotten used to their quiet presence and practical suggestions. Other species made grand speeches and argued about honor and tradition. The humans had simply tried to fix problems and help people. Now they were gone, and the problems they had warned about were getting worse every day. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared from galactic society. What had started as mild concern was now growing into something close to panic. The Galactic Council was learning a hard lesson about how much they had depended on a species they had considered young and unimportant. The trade problems were getting worse every week. Shipping costs had doubled for frontier routes. Some colonies were running short of basic supplies because no one wanted to risk the dangerous deliveries that human traders had handled routinely. 3 new settlements had been abandoned completely. when they could not get the equipment they needed to survive. But the economic troubles were just the beginning. The Council was discovering that humans had been involved in almost every part of galactic civilization, usually in ways that no one had noticed or appreciated. Counselor Vexhai sat in her office reading reports that made her light patterns flicker with worry. The diplomatic corps had submitted a list of ongoing negotiations that were now stuck because human mediators were no longer available. It was a longer list than she had expected. The humans had not been the primary negotiators in these talks. They had been the ones who sat quietly in the background and suggested practical solutions when other species got stuck arguing about pride and protocol. They had a talent for finding ways to let everyone save face while actually solving problems. How? Many trade disputes involved human mediators? She asked her assistant. 43 active cases, Counselor, and 16 territorial disagreements that were making progress before the humans withdrew. Vexhai looked at the specific cases and felt a chill. Without human mediation, several of these disputes were already heating up again. The Keth and the Iriliks had stopped talking to each other completely over mining rights in the Omega sector. Two smaller species were moving warships toward a contested system that humans had been helping them share peacefully. What about the technical consultation projects? Her assistant's patterns dimmed further. Those are even worse, Counselor. The humans were involved in 79 ongoing engineering projects across the galaxy. Most of those projects have stopped completely. This was perhaps the strangest discovery of all. Humans were not the most advanced species in the galaxy. Their technology was decent, but not amazing. Their ships were reliable, but not the fastest. Their weapons were effective, but not the most powerful. So why were so many other species asking? For their help with technical problems? The answer, Vexhai was learning, had nothing to do with superior technology. It had to do with the way humans thought about problems. Other species had spent millions of years developing their technology along predictable paths. They had traditions and established methods for doing things. When they encountered a problem their traditional methods could not solve, they often got stuck. Humans were too young to have these rigid traditions. When they saw a problem, they would try anything that might work. They combined ideas from different fields in ways that older species found strange or even disturbing. They were willing to use simple solutions that worked, instead of elegant solutions that fit their theories. The Iriliks had been struggling for 50 years to improve the efficiency of their mining equipment. Human engineers had looked at the problem for 2 weeks and suggested a simple change to the timing of the extraction cycles. It worked perfectly, but Iriliks engineers had never considered it because it did not fit their traditional understanding of how mining was supposed to work. The Zephyrians had been trying to solve communication problems with a distant colony. Their best scientists had designed increasingly complex transmission systems that still could not get through the interference around the colony's star. Human technicians had suggested using a series of simple relay stations positioned in specific spots around the star system. It was basic technology that any species could build, but no one had thought to use it that way. These kinds of stories were everywhere once people started looking. Humans had been quietly solving problems across the galaxy by thinking about them differently. They did not have better tools, but they used their tools in better ways. Now all those projects were stopped. Species that had been making progress on important problems were stuck again. Equipment that had been working efficiently was breaking down without human maintenance suggestions. Systems that had been optimized by human engineers were slowly becoming less effective as the improvements were forgotten or misunderstood. Counselor Thekmore of the Keth hegemony was facing even more serious problems. The military situation was getting worse every day. The Void Sector raids that had started with attacks on human colonies were now hitting targets across a huge area of space. 17 star systems had reported attacks in the past month. The raiders were not random pirates anymore. They moved in coordinated groups and seemed to have detailed intelligence about their targets. They knew exactly where to hit to cause the most damage and how to avoid the Council's patrol ships. It was like they were being commanded by someone who understood both military tactics and galactic politics. General Corthes had assembled the largest patrol fleet in 50 years, but the results were disappointing. The raiders seemed to know where the council ships would be and when. They attacked targets that were supposedly protected, and they avoided areas where the fleet was concentrated. Several times, patrol ships had arrived at attack sites to find nothing but wreckage and empty space. "Sir, we need to consider the possibility that these raiders are not ordinary criminals," Colonel Ratham reported during a military briefing. "Their tactics suggest advanced intelligence gathering and possibly inside knowledge of our operations." Thekmore studied the attack patterns on the tactical display. The raids formed a rough circle around what had once been the edge of human space. But no attacks had been reported from inside human territory. Either the humans were fighting off the raiders successfully, or the raiders were avoiding human space for some reason. "Have we tried to contact the humans about this situation?" Thekmore asked. The communications officer looked uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. We have sent several messages requesting information about the raids and offering to coordinate our response with theirs. The responses have been brief." "What do they say?" "Thank you for your concern. The situation in our territory is under control. We hope you find a solution to your difficulties." That was all. The humans were not asking for help, not offering to help, and not sharing any information about how they were dealing with the raiders. They were treating the council like distant neighbors who were having problems that were not their business. The most frustrating part was that the humans were clearly having better success against the raiders than anyone else. Intelligence reports suggested that attacks on human territory had stopped completely about 3 months ago. Not reduced, not contained, but stopped entirely. Whatever the humans were doing to protect themselves, it was working perfectly, but they were not sharing that information with anyone else. The species that had refused to help them were now struggling with the same enemy, and the humans were letting them figure it out on their own. Admiral Yendal of the Zephyrian fleet had a different theory about what was happening. She had been studying the attack patterns and the timeline of events, and she had reached a disturbing conclusion. "I believe the raiders are testing us," she told a closed meeting of senior military officers. "They are learning how we respond to threats, how our ships perform in combat, and how well we coordinate between different species." "Testing us for what?" General Corthes asked. "For a larger attack. These raids are too organized and too well planned. To be random piracy. Someone is preparing for something bigger." The room was quiet as the officers considered this possibility. If Admiral Yendal was right, then the council was facing not just a crime problem, but a potential invasion, and they were facing it without their most innovative and adaptable allies. Counselor Vexhai had been thinking about the same possibility. She had requested a private meeting with the council's top intelligence analysts to discuss what they knew about the void sectors and who might be operating from there. The news was not good. The void sectors were areas of space that most civilized species avoided. They contained old battlefields from ancient wars, failed colonies that had been abandoned for various reasons, and rogue planets that had been expelled from their original star systems. The regions were difficult to navigate and dangerous to explore, but they were also perfect hiding places for anyone who wanted to avoid detection by the galactic authorities. If someone was building a military force in the void sectors, they could probably do it without being noticed until they were ready to attack. How long would it take to build a fleet large enough to threaten council space? Vexhai asked. Chief, Analyst Morton checked his calculations. With the resources available in the void sectors, probably several years. But if they had help from some outside source, or if they found abandoned military equipment from the old wars, they could do it much faster. And if they had been preparing for this attack for a long time, then they might be ready now, Counselor. These raids could be their final preparations before a major offensive. Vexhai felt her light patterns dim with fear. The Council was facing The desperate search-first Counselor Yilandra had made a decision that surprised even herself. After months of growing problems and unanswered questions, she was going to try to contact the humans directly, not through official diplomatic channels that had been ignored, but by leading an expedition to the edge of human space herself. She had lived for 800 years and had been first counselor for the last century. In all that time, she had never personally left the council station to chase after a single species. But the situation was becoming desperate, and desperate times called for unusual actions. The expedition consisted of 3 ships: her personal diplomatic vessel, a science ship equipped with the best sensors the council had, and a small escort cruiser. They were not going to human space to make demands or threats. They were going to observe, to learn, and hopefully to understand what the humans had become during their months of isolation. Captain Zektal commanded the science vessel and was the best long-range reconnaissance officer in the council fleet. His species, the Thakani, had the sharpest natural senses of any known race, and their technology enhanced those senses even further. If anyone could figure out what the humans were doing, it would be him. The journey to the edge of human space took 5 days through normal hyperspace lanes. As they got closer to the border, the expedition began to encounter strange readings on their instruments. Space itself seemed different somehow, though the sensors could not identify exactly what had changed. First Counselor, Captain Zektal, reported from his science ship, "We are detecting an unusual energy pattern ahead. It appears to extend along the entire border of human space." "What kind of energy pattern?" Yelandra asked. "Unknown, ma'am. It is not matching any signatures in our databases, but it appears to be artificial and very extensive." When they reached the coordinates where human space officially began, the expedition found something that should have been impossible. There was a barrier, not a physical wall or an energy field that they could analyze, but something that simply prevented them from going further while allowing them to see clearly what lay beyond. It was like looking through perfectly clear glass that could not be broken, bypassed, or penetrated. Their ships could approach it safely, but any attempt to cross the boundary resulted in their vessels being gently but irresistibly pushed back to where they started. "Captain Zektal, can your sensors tell us anything about this barrier?" Yelandra asked. "I am running every scan we have available, First Counselor. The barrier appears to be there, but my instruments cannot detect what it is made of or how it works. It is like it exists in a dimension we cannot perceive directly." But while they could not cross the barrier, they could observe what was happening on the other side. And what they saw was shocking. Human space had been transformed completely. Where there had once been scattered colonies and small space stations, there were now massive structures orbiting every star. These were not the simple mining platforms and research outposts that humans had built before. These were enormous constructions that seemed to serve multiple purposes at once. Some of the structures looked like space cities, with rotating sections that could house millions of people. Others appeared to be industrial complexes on a scale that no species had ever attempted. Still others defied easy classification, with organic curves and crystalline formations that seemed to grow rather than be built. "Are those defensive installations?" Yelandra asked, pointing to a series of geometric shapes positioned around one star system. Captain Zektal adjusted his sensors for a better look. "Partially, First Counselor, but they appear to serve multiple functions: defense, manufacturing, research, maybe even agriculture. It is like the humans have redesigned the entire concept of space infrastructure." The ships moving through human space were equally impressive and confusing. They moved in perfect formations that suggested military precision, but their designs were unlike any military vessels in Council databases. They were sleek and elegant, but also somehow organic-looking, as if they had been grown rather than built. "How many ships are we seeing?" Yelandra asked. "Thousands, First Counselor. And those are just the ones we can detect easily. There may be many more using stealth technology or operating in ways our sensors cannot track." Most disturbing of all was the simple fact that this massive transformation had happened in less than a year. The humans had not just survived their isolation, they had used it to completely rebuild their entire civilization. The species that had asked for help with a few pirate raids had somehow developed into something far more advanced than anything the Council had ever seen. First Counselor, the communications officer reported, "We are receiving a transmission." "From the humans?" "Yes, ma'am. It is very brief. Greetings, Council Expedition. You are welcome to observe from your current position. If you require assistance, please state your needs clearly." Yilandra was surprised by the polite but distant tone of the message. The humans were not angry or hostile, but they were treating the Council Expedition like foreign tourists who were welcome to look but not to touch. "Open a channel," she ordered. "This is First Counselor Yilandra of the Galactic Council. We request permission to enter human space for diplomatic discussions." The response came quickly. "Thank you for your interest, First Counselor. Humanity is not currently accepting diplomatic visitors. If you have a specific proposal or concern, please transmit it for our consideration. We wish to discuss the Void Sector situation and explore possibilities for renewed cooperation." There was a longer pause before the next response. "The Void Sector situation has been resolved. Council space appears to be experiencing ongoing difficulties with these raiders. If you require assistance with that problem, please submit a formal request with specific details about what help you need." Yilandra felt a chill of realization. The humans were offering to help the Council with the same problem the Council had refused to help them with months ago. But they were doing it as if they were the superior power offering aid to someone weaker, not as equals seeking cooperation. "What do you mean the Void Sector situation has been resolved?" she asked. "The raiders are no longer operating from the Void Sectors. They have been relocated to an area where they cannot threaten civilian populations. The threat to frontier colonies has been eliminated." Captain Zektal was frantically adjusting his sensors to scan the Void Sectors. After several minutes, he reported his findings with obvious shock in his voice. "First Counselor, the Void Sectors are empty, not abandoned, not destroyed, but completely clear of any artificial structures or ships. It is like someone cleaned them out entirely." Yilandra stared at the displays showing human space and tried to understand what she was seeing. The humans had not just defended themselves against the raiders, they had apparently solved the entire problem by eliminating the raiders' bases and removing them as a threat. And they had done it so completely that even the most advanced Council sensors could find no trace of what had happened. "How long ago was this relocation completed?" she asked the humans. "Approximately 60 days ago. The operation was concluded without casualties among civilian populations or damage to legitimate settlements. 60 days ago, the Council fleet had still been struggling to track down individual raider groups and protect scattered colonies. While the Council's best military minds had been planning defensive strategies, the humans had apparently ended the entire conflict with a single, coordinated operation." "What happened to the raiders?" Yilandra asked. "They were offered the choice of relocating to uninhabited space or facing the consequences of their actions. Most chose relocation. Those who did not are no longer a concern." The casual tone of that statement was somehow more frightening than any threat could have been. The humans were talking about eliminating a threat that had terrorized the frontier for months, and they discussed it like a routine administrative task. "First Counselor," Captain Zektal called from his ship, "I am detecting something else. There are structures being built in several star systems that do not appear on any of our charts. The humans appear to be expanding into previously unexplored space." Yilandra looked at the sensor readings and felt her understanding of the situation shift again. The humans were not just defending their existing territory. They were growing, exploring, and building in areas that other species had never reached. While the Council had been focused on protecting what they already had, the humans had been expanding into new frontiers. How is this expansion possible? She wondered aloud. Those star systems are weeks of travel from the nearest hyperspace lanes. Unknown, First Counselor. But the human ships appear to be using some form of faster travel that we cannot detect or understand. The implications were staggering. The humans had developed new technology, new strategies, and new capabilities that went far beyond anything the Council had imagined possible. They had done it in less than a year, while simultaneously solving a military problem that the Council could not handle. As the expedition prepared to return to Council space, Yelandra sent one final message. The Council would like to arrange formal discussions about future relations between our peoples. The price of pride. The news from the frontier was getting worse every day. What had started as scattered raids had become a full invasion that the Council's military forces could not stop. 23 star systems had fallen to the Void Raiders in the past 2 months. Millions of people had been evacuated from their homes, and many more had simply disappeared. Admiral Corthes stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Righteous Dawn, and watched another evacuation convoy limping toward the inner systems. The ships were overloaded with refugees, and many showed damage from attacks during their escape. His once proud Grand Fleet had been reduced to running rescue missions while the enemy took whatever they wanted. Admiral, his tactical officer, reported, "The Kepler Junction has fallen. The raiders destroyed the defense platforms and are moving toward the Centauri colonies." Corthes felt his heart sink. The Kepler Junction was a major trade hub that connected 12 different star systems. Its fall meant that entire regions of Council space were now cut off from support and supplies. The raiders were not just taking territory. They were destroying the infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. "How many ships did we lose defending Kepler?" he asked. 7 heavy cruisers and 14 escorts, sir. The enemy force was much larger than our intelligence predicted. That was the pattern that had been repeating for months. Council intelligence would estimate the size of an enemy force, the fleet would respond with what should have been adequate ships, and then they would find themselves facing a much larger and better coordinated attack than expected. It was like the raiders knew exactly how the Council would respond and planned their attacks accordingly. "Sir, we have an urgent message from the evacuation convoy," the communications officer called. "Out. They are under attack near the Vega system. Multiple raider ships, coordinated assault pattern." Corthes looked at the tactical display. The convoy was 6 hours away at maximum speed, and they had only a small escort force. By the time the Grand Fleet arrived, it would be over. He was about to order the nearest patrol ships to respond when something unexpected happened. "Sir, we are detecting unknown ships entering the battle zone," the sensor operator reported. "Configuration unknown, but they are engaging the raiders." On the main screen, new contacts appeared near the convoy. The ships moved with impossible precision, striking the raider formation like a surgical knife cutting through soft flesh. Their weapons were devastating but precise, destroying enemy ships without damaging any of the civilian vessels. The entire battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, the raider force had been completely eliminated and the convoy was safe. The unknown ships regrouped briefly, then vanished into hyperspace before the Council forces could get a clear look at them. "What just happened?" Corthes asked his bridge crew. "Unknown, sir. The ships appeared, eliminated the threat, and departed. We have no identification on their design or origin, but Corthes had a strong suspicion about who those ships belonged to." The tactical display showed the precision and coordination that had once made human cargo escorts so effective. But these were not the simple armed freighters that humans had used before. These were warships of a design that no Council database contained. A single transmission reached the Grand Fleet on an open frequency. The voice was calm and carried the accent that Corthes recognized as human. "Admiral, your evacuation convoy is secure. The route to Centauri Prime is clear for the next 12 hours. Safe travels, then silence." The ships were gone, and the convoy was continuing its journey to safety. The humans had saved thousands of Council citizens and asked for nothing in return. They had not even identified themselves officially. "Sir, should we pursue the unknown?" Ships and attempt to make contact? The navigation officer asked. Corthes considered the question. The humans had clearly violated council space, engaged in combat without authorization, and departed without proper diplomatic protocols. Under normal circumstances, he would be required to file a complaint and demand an explanation. But these were not normal circumstances. The humans had just saved an entire convoy that his own forces could not protect. They had eliminated a raider force that might have taken hours for council ships to defeat, assuming they could defeat it at all. No, he said finally. Log the incident as assistance from an unknown ally, send a message to the convoy thanking them for the rescue and wishing them safe journey. Over the following weeks, similar incidents happened throughout the war zone. Council forces under attack would suddenly find themselves supported by mysterious ships that appeared from nowhere, destroyed the enemy with overwhelming efficiency, and vanished before anyone could make formal contact. The pattern became familiar to every council military officer. The unknown ships never stayed to accept thanks or discuss strategy. They never asked for payment or political concessions. They simply protected council civilians and military forces when they were in immediate danger, then disappeared. But they were clearly human ships, and they were clearly far more advanced than anything the humans had possessed a year ago. The vessels moved faster than council sensors could track accurately. Their weapons were more powerful than anything in the council arsenal. Their coordination was perfect, as if they were controlled by a single mind rather than individual crews. Most impressive of all was their intelligence network. The human ships always seemed to know exactly where attacks were happening and exactly when to arrive for maximum effect. They never showed up too early and revealed their presence unnecessarily, and they never arrived too late to help. Councillor Theckmore was trying to understand how this was possible. The Council's own intelligence operations were struggling to track the raiders' movements. How were the humans, who had been cut off from galactic society for months, managing to monitor the situation better than anyone else? We need to consider the possibility that the humans have developed surveillance capabilities far beyond our current understanding, Intelligence Chief Morten reported during a security briefing. They appear to have real-time information about events across thousands of light years. That should be impossible, Theckmore replied. Even our fastest communication systems cannot coordinate information over such distances quickly enough for the kind of response times we are seeing. Yes, sir. Which suggests that the humans have solved problems we did not know were solvable. The implications were disturbing. If the humans had developed technology that advanced in such a short time, what else might they have achieved? And if they could monitor events throughout council space so effectively, what did that mean for privacy and security? But the most troubling aspect of the situation was not the humans' new capabilities, it was their attitude. They were helping the council forces, but only in specific ways. They would rescue civilians and protect evacuation convoys. They would eliminate immediate threats to non-combatants. But they would not participate in larger strategic operations or coordinate with council military planning. It was like they were treating the council as victims who needed protection, not as allies in a common cause. They were offering charity, not partnership. Admiral Corthes had tried several times to establish formal communication with the human ships during rescue operations. The responses were always polite but minimal. Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Corthes of the Council Grand Fleet. We request coordination for joint operations against the raiders. Admiral, we appreciate your offer. Our operations are independent. We will continue to assist with civilian protection as opportunities arise. Can we arrange a meeting to discuss strategy and intelligence sharing? Admiral, we prefer to maintain operational independence. Your forces are performing adequately in their assigned roles. That last response had been particularly stinging. The humans were essentially saying that the council forces were doing fine for what they were capable of, but that real strategic operations were beyond their abilities. The worst part was that the evidence supported that assessment. While the council fleet struggled to respond to attacks and protect key systems, The human operations were solving the entire conflict piece by piece. Intelligence reports suggested that the raiders' supply lines were being systematically destroyed by unknown forces. Forward bases that had been hidden in asteroid fields were being eliminated with precision strikes. Even the raiders' communications networks were being disrupted in ways that Council electronic warfare specialists could not. Duplicate. Sir? Colonel Ratham reported during a staff meeting. We have lost contact with 3 more raider groups in the past week. They appear to have simply vanished from their last known positions. Destroyed? Corthus asked. Unknown, sir. There are no debris fields or energy signatures to indicate battles. The ships were there one day and gone the next. It was becoming clear that while the Council fought a defensive war against the raiders, the humans were fighting an entirely different kind of war. They were not just defeating enemy forces, they were making them disappear completely, as if they had never existed. The end came suddenly and without warning. Admiral Corthus was planning the defense of the core worlds when his intelligence officers reported something impossible. What humans become 5 years had passed since the humans walked out of the Council chambers without anger or argument. 5 years since they had quietly closed their borders and disappeared from galactic civilization. Now, First Counselor Yelandra was traveling to meet them again, but the circumstances had changed completely. The Galactic Council still existed, but it was much smaller than before. 3 major species had withdrawn to focus on their own territories. 7 smaller civilizations had simply stopped sending representatives. The great trading networks that had connected the galaxy for thousands of years were broken, replaced by smaller regional agreements that barely maintained basic commerce. The Council that had once governed hundreds of worlds now struggled to coordinate a few dozen systems. Their military was a fraction of its former size, reduced to local defense forces that could barely patrol their own space. The grand dreams of galactic unity and progress had been replaced by the simple goal of maintaining what remained. But, while the Council declined, other powers had risen. Strange ships were seen trading in the outer systems, carrying goods and passengers between worlds that had never been part of the traditional galactic community. New settlements appeared in previously empty space, built by people who had somehow obtained technology that surpassed anything the old civilizations possessed. Most mysterious of all were the reports of worlds that had transformed themselves completely. Planets that had been struggling colonies were now described as garden paradises, with cities that defied conventional understanding of architecture and engineering. The few travelers who returned from these places spoke of societies that seemed to blend the best aspects of dozens of different species into something entirely new. All of these changes seemed to trace back to human space, though no one could prove the connection. The barriers around human territory had become permeable again, but only to small ships carrying individuals rather than large diplomatic or trade delegations. People who entered human space sometimes returned, but they were often reluctant to discuss what they had seen in detail. The message that had brought Yelandra to this meeting had been simple and direct. First Counselor, if the Council wishes to understand the current state of galactic civilization, we invite you to visit Haven. Station. Come alone or with a small personal staff. No military escort or formal delegation. The coordinates they provided led to a system that did not appear on any Council charts. According to their navigation computers, it should have been empty space. But when Yelandra's ship arrived, she found something that challenged her understanding of what was possible. Haven Station was not a space station in any traditional sense. It was a structure that seemed to grow and change as she watched, with organic curves that flowed into crystalline formations that connected to metallic frameworks in patterns that should not have been stable. The entire structure was hundreds of kilometers across, but it felt more like a living entity than a constructed facility. Ships from dozens of species were docked around the station, but many of the designs were unfamiliar. Some appeared to be modifications of known vessels, enhanced with technology that made them faster and more efficient. Others were completely new configurations that seemed to blend the engineering principles of multiple civilizations into hybrid forms. As Yilandra's diplomatic ship approached the docking bay, she noticed that the bay itself adapted to accommodate her vessel. The structure flowed and reformed to create a perfect fit for her ship's configuration, complete with atmospheric seals and gravity orientations that matched her species' preferences. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin met her at the airlock, and Yilandra was shocked to see that he looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago. Humans were supposed to age visibly over such a time period, but Chen showed no signs of the passage of time. His appearance raised questions about what other changes the humans had undergone during their isolation. "First Counselor," Chen said, with a warm smile, "welcome to Haven Station. I hope your journey was comfortable." "Ambassador Chen," she replied, trying to maintain diplomatic composure despite her amazement at her surroundings. "You look, well." "Thank you. The years have been kind to humanity. Shall we take a tour of the station? I think you will find it educational." As they walked through corridors that seemed to adjust their lighting and configuration based on who was using them, Chen began to explain what Yilandra was seeing. "Haven Station is what we call a collaborative structure," he said. "It was built by representatives of 47 different species working together, using the best ideas and technologies from each civilization. But more importantly, it was built by people who were willing to think beyond the traditional limitations of their cultures." The corridors were filled with beings that Yilandra recognized, but also many that she did not. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working side by side on projects that seemed to benefit everyone involved. Former subjects of various empires were using technologies that had once been restricted to their rulers. Young people from dozens of worlds were collaborating on research that their traditional educational systems would never have permitted. "How is this possible?" Yilandra asked. "These species have been fighting each other for thousands of years." "They were fighting over resources and territory that their governments told them were limited," Chen replied. "When people discover that there are actually unlimited opportunities available, most conflicts become unnecessary." They entered a vast chamber with a transparent wall that looked out into space. Beyond the wall, Yilandra could see construction, projects that boggled her imagination. Entire cities were being built in open space, using materials and techniques that combined the knowledge of multiple civilizations. Ships that looked like they could carry millions of people were being assembled by crews that worked with perfect coordination despite representing dozens of different species. "We call this the next phase," Chen explained. "When people are freed from the artificial limitations of traditional thinking, they discover capabilities they never knew they possessed." "What kind of limitations?" Yilandra asked. Chen gestured toward the construction work outside. "The belief that species must compete rather than collaborate. The assumption that technology must develop along predictable paths. The idea that some civilizations are naturally superior to others. The conviction that resources are scarce and must be hoarded rather than shared." As they continued the tour, Yilandra began to understand what she was really seeing. This was not just a space station or even a collection of refugee settlements. This was the foundation of an entirely new kind of civilization, one that operated on principles completely different from anything the Galactic Council had ever attempted. "Where did all these people come from?" she asked. "They came to us," Chen replied simply. "When individuals realize that their traditional societies cannot offer them the opportunities they desire, they seek alternatives. We provide those alternatives." "You mean you are recruiting people away from their home civilizations?" "We mean we accept anyone who chooses to join something larger than what they can achieve alone. We do not recruit. We simply exist as an option for those who want different possibilities." They visited laboratories where researchers from former enemy species worked together on projects that had once been considered impossible. They saw workshops where artisans combined techniques from different worlds to create entirely new forms of art and technology. They observed schools where children from dozens of species learned together using educational methods that developed their natural abilities rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. Most impressive of all was the way everything seemed to work together perfectly. There were no obvious hierarchies or command structures, but every project moved forward efficiently. There were no visible security forces, but everyone seemed safe and content. There were no apparent scarcity problems, but resources were used carefully and nothing was wasted. "How do you organize all this?" Yolandra asked. "How do you coordinate so many different species and projects without central authority?" Chen smiled. "We learned that organization and coordination are much easier when everyone involved wants the same things. When people share common goals and have unlimited opportunities to achieve them, they naturally work together effectively. But what happens when people disagree or want different things? Then they pursue different projects. The galaxy is large enough for many different approaches to exist simultaneously. Competition is only destructive when people believe there is not enough space or resources for everyone to succeed." As evening approached by the station's artificial day cycle, Chen led Yolandra to an observation deck where they could see the full scope of the activity around Haven Station. Ships arrived and departed constantly, carrying people and goods between worlds that spanned the galaxy. Construction projects continued around the clock, building facilities that would support millions more residents and workers. "This is what humanity has become," Chen said quietly. "Not conquerors or rulers, but facilitators. We help other species discover what they are capable of when they are not limited by the expectations of their traditional societies." "And what about the council?" Yolandra asked.